Please welcome Chris Ravelli, CEO of Plant Construction.
Building housing, any housing in California, is not cheap. A recent LA Times story painted a damning picture of the cost to build housing in California that's affordable to lower income residents. One particularly egregious example put the cost per unit at $1.1 million. The statewide average at $500,000 tops in the nation for affordable housing. An estimate a few years ago by the State Legislative Analyst Office put the cost of subsidizing our way out of the housing crisis, specifically at the lower income category, where somewhere in the ballpark of $350 billion. That's more than the entire state budget for 1 year and more than 3 times the current level of surplus and reserves. Meanwhile, high housing costs are among a major reason that a growing number of Californians, particularly lower and middle income Californians, are leaving the state, along with employers and jobs. So what can we do to bring down the staggering cost of building housing in California? Today we've got a terrific group of leaders to try to answer that question. Linda Malinini is president and CEO of Eden Housing and a giant in the affordable housing world. Under her leadership over the past 10 years, Eden Housing has become one of the most productive and successful nonprofit affordable housing developers and owners in California, and it's naturally recognized for its work. Carol Gallant is a housing innovation legend. She founded the Turner Center for Housing and Innovation at UC Berkeley, served in various housing leadership roles in the Obama administration, and was CEO of Bridge Housing, which, by the way, the Bay Area Council was instrumental in launching. Assembly member Tim Grayson is one of California's biggest housing champions. He authored numerous bills on local government accountability and housing fee reform. And he helped lead a statewide listening tour on housing that's been cited as a major reason the Assembly has been so energetic on housing issues this year. Leading the conversation, my friend Michael Matthews, Public Policy Director for Meta, and also former co-chair of the Transportation Committee for the Bay Area Council. Meta has been at the forefront among Bay Area companies in addressing our housing crisis, committing billions of dollars to support the construction of affordable housing across the region and state. So please welcome our panel.
Thank you, Chris. Let's start with Linda. And a lot of our conversation here, I have a few questions here that the staff was kind enough to help put together, and so thank you for the staff especially, and Chris, thank you for the introduction. But a lot of it's around pricing and housing, but we'll just sort of throw it out there and see where we end up, because as Michael suggested, we're supposed to be here to come up with solutions, so I don't know. So let's start, Linda. And as an affordable home builder, let's start putting aside things you can't necessarily control, such as land prices, material, and labor costs. What are some of the biggest drivers per unit of these costs, of home costs?
I can't control the entire cost of the housing. You know, I want to talk a little bit about those drivers, right? And I think part of the challenge when you build affordable housing, and I want to just give a shout out to the Assembly member, because California is really trying. You know, the single biggest problem we've had in California is that we have not built enough housing for a very long time, and we didn't start getting real religion around changing the rules until 2016. Yeah. And that was when Governor Brown did some stuff with the Assembly to really put more money into housing and really change the way we build, right? And so we have a number of projects that we started this year, put them in construction, but it took us 10 years to start construction. So time is money. Okay. You know, if any of you were developing software and it took you 10 years to get it to market, you'd probably lose, right? Like it just can't take that long because it drives your costs. And so some of the streamlining bills that have come through the legislature have really helped us move product to market more quickly. But Kara just mentioned NIMBY. I tell you, that is alive and well. Yeah. And we still have some work to do there. So I think that's a big thing. And I also think that when you look at cost, you know, we can't produce enough fast enough. And so I think one of the things that we've been really interested in is how do you streamline the cost of land? You know, what does the city own? What does the state own? What does Meta own? How do you get land into the system so you can at least lower that cost? Yeah. Because construction costs are pretty hard for us to control. And the other thing we've been doing, and I just want to talk about technology, you know, we just opened our first deal with Factory OS. So, you know, and I think you're probably an investor there. Sure. But I had been trying to do a modular project since my first project when I was 25 years old, and I am way past 25. And this is the first one that I've done. So that actually delivered the boxes and we got the product done. And I'm just going to use an example to contrast this with. Our colleagues in Canada, in Vancouver, at BC Housing, put up 2,000 units in 24 months for homeless people on parking lots that they leased from the Michael Covarrubiases of Canada. And they did it with modular housing. They're real live apartments. They leased that stuff for 10 to 15 years, and they did that in 24 months. We actually have the technology. We just really have to figure out the solutions to doing this. And I think there is a lot going on in the modular space. And the reason we did OS, and not just because Rick Holiday is my predecessor at Eden, it's because we really feel like we have to think about, are there other solutions to getting product to market faster, that are more cost effective and more timely? So that's my short speech on this.
No, that's great. So Carol, you get to answer as to how to respond to that. And in essence, I know you guys have done excellent research, Turner Center, and we've been glad to work with you on some of that. And so what can be done to address some of the high costs that Linda described?
So I would just say that the industrialized construction that Linda mentioned, whether it's Factory OS or other means, absolutely is something that we as a state need to invest more energy into. And I think there's a lot more that can be done at the state level to support, and I know since Factory OS is in Assemblymember Grayson's district, I know he agrees with this. So I do think there's a whole lot more around the actual way we construct that can help lower costs. But I'm going to go back to another point that Linda made
Please.
about how it takes 10 years, and some of that's the entitlement process. We've done a lot of good work on streamlining. Part of it is, and I'm going to speak specifically to the overall philosophy of the state and the municipalities, that the answer to our broad housing affordability issue is the building of $1 million dedicated affordable housing homes. Okay? And I actually think that is not the answer to our overall housing affordability problem. We need to save our public resources, and we need to be doing dedicated affordable housing the way Linda does, but we can't be doing it to the exclusion of building for the broad workforce. Right now, all of our housing dollars in the system in California are essentially going to people at the extreme, not just low income, at the extremely low income. We have forgotten the families that are at 50, 60, 70, 80, 100% of the median income. And until we create a system that actually builds housing for everybody, everywhere in California, we're not going to solve the homelessness issue, because we're just going to keep manufacturing homelessness until you kind of take care of the entire income stream. And so our system, our competitive systems for public resources in California do not support that. Our regulatory system does not support that. And to me, that's what's got to change. And I know Assemblymember Grayson's going to do that.
Well, we're going to pivot slightly in the order of something. So thank you, Carol. That's exactly right. So this is a round robin question for everybody. We'll start with Assemblyperson Grayson on that. The missing middle question. So how do we spark some light in the area that Carol addressed and Linda talked about as we talk about sort of the challenges there?
The missing middle is a huge, huge issue, which I think, great. By the way, I'm just humbled to be between a lot of smartness here.
These two, yes.
And the comments that have already been made have sent chills, because I'm excited about housing. I don't even sit on a housing committee, but I'm excited about it. About not sitting on the housing committee, actually.
But we appreciate that you act like you sit on the housing
I
committee,
do.
because you have a lot of housing bills.
It gives me a lot of freedom, actually, to be able to do what I do. And the reason why, the epiphany for me was when I woke up one day and thought, why do I care so much about housing? Well, I have 2 kids, and I don't want to have to get on an airplane to go visit my grandkids one day because my kids couldn't afford to live where I raised them. And so my motivation may be a bit selfish, but I do believe it is for the well-being of the housing here in the state of California. And for me, I absolutely 100% agree. I wholeheartedly support affordable housing. However, I also support housing that's affordable. And the Upjohn Center put out a study that made it really clear, at least to me, that by addressing the missing middle and opening up that bottleneck, then you create this upflow, and some people called it a migrating, or I had to write it down, a migration chain, but I actually call it the housing ladder. And it's where you enter into the housing market as an owner, and then you know that there is this upflow where you can upgrade, and as you do, it continues this flow of new entrants into the housing market. But because of the affordability and what has happened in as a crisis in California, we've created a bottleneck to where there is no upgrade, and therefore have completely stopped the flow of entry into the home ownership. So with that, we need volumes of missing middle housing development. And by doing that, we can open up the housing ladder, create that inflow into the home ownership. However, in California at this time, we're facing the impossibility not of affording a mortgage, but of affording the down payment to be able to have a mortgage. And so with that, I'm happy to say that the state is starting to move the needle on priority to home ownership. I think it's a well-known stat that homeowners are 40 times have a worth of 40 times more than what a renter would have, a homeowner. So with that, California has moved the needle and put $400 million into the budget this year to help with down payment assistance. And there are creative ways we can do that in a sustainable way where you're just not giving away money with no return.
That's great. And in that group of we're talking about, it's a lot of teachers, firefighters, first responders, in quote the missing middle, who are a huge part of our ecosystem that are being squeezed in that for that lack of housing.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, there's, people use the term missing middle in a variety of ways. There's missing middle in terms of the middle income. There's also the missing middle in terms of the product type, which is in, like SB9, which is in the duplexes and the triplexes and the accessory dwelling units. So weaving, more homes into our existing single-family neighborhood. And if I could just make one other comment, podcasts, like Ezra Klein, who's listened to the most recent Ezra Klein podcast on housing. Okay, you have to download it. Kara's former colleague. It does an interview with Jenny Schutz from Brookings Institution about the broad housing affordability crisis. And really, she splits it into, there's the people at the very low, extremely low income end, and there's everybody else. And only California, Hawaii, Washington, New York, there's like 5 places that have that really broad housing affordability issue in terms of cost, and it really just comes down to exactly what the Assembly member just talked about. So it's a great podcast, and I encourage everybody to listen to it.
Linda, you want to?
Well, I think a couple things are actually happening, and I'll just pick up on this because I do think if you look in Washington State, they use the tax exemption in Seattle to allow market rate housing developers to set aside 20% of their units for families who make 80 to 120% of median income. It's rental, but it's more affordable rental than market rate. We have a JPA product that has a little controversy around it here in California, but it's actually a good product. Like, it is incumbent upon us to look at how you look at buying buildings. And, I work in Hayward, that's where our offices are. And for the longest time, we were seeing these buildings that were moderately affordable. They weren't restricted affordable, but they were, tenants were paying $2,500 to $3,000 a month for their 2-bedroom, and they were getting their rents jacked up at rates that were just obscene. And Eden couldn't go buy that. We couldn't go purchase it because our 501c3 doesn't allow us to use a tax exemption. We could buy it and convert it, but we'd be displacing the 80% people. So there is a JPA model that California has been using that I think with some regulation could be a really important tool, and I think acquisitions generally are important. Then I just want to talk about all of the colleges and universities and the school districts because they are starting to really put their land to work, and we are working with a number of school districts that are saying, okay, we have to house our own teachers. How do we do this? How do we create a program where we're really going after either rental housing or ownership housing so that we're helping our teachers. Because I think you have to have all these solutions at the table. We need more supply in the middle, and it's really hard to do.
Gotcha. Switching gears just a little bit, Assemblyperson Grayson, government mandates, since you're in government. We'll start with you. Low-impact fees are a wide range of building requirements. What is your sense the balance needed to achieve the best results as the mandates on housing and construction?
So having experience in building, I know what it's like to stand on that side of the planning counter
Okay.
and pay for fees. Then being mayor of a city here in East Bay area, I know what it's like to sit at the dais knowing that funding comes from fees. So I understand, and I like the way you asked the question about the balance. There has to be a balance. However, fees, thanks to the Turner Center and the wonderful report that you put out, we learned that fees, impact fees in particular, can range up to 18% of the actual cost of development, which is unsustainable. You can't build affordability at that rate. And so I did author, and it was signed by the governor, AB 602, which addressed transparency, posting the schedule of fees in a way that was very easily accessible, addressing the nexus of how fees are created and where they land. However, that didn't cover connection fees, and something that was negotiated out of that bill. And I left, the last word last year was, I'll be back. And so
Please.
I came back this year with AB 2536, addressing both connection and capacity fees, and would like to announce that yesterday Governor Newsom signed that bill. And
Congratulations.
so very, very happy.
Thank you.
So addressing impact fees is absolutely huge. And if I may,
Please.
Part of the fee issue that we're dealing with is, well, I'll say it, and I'm only saying it from a factual standpoint, no opinion, but Prop 13. And the reason why I bring that up is whether you have an opinion one way or another. The fact is we have an aggressive fee schedule on a municipal level because of, in many cases, people say Prop 13. So because of that, fees are a huge issue, especially when redevelopment agencies went away. When redevelopment agencies went away, we learned this on the Housing Working Group tour when we landed in Fresno. And in Fresno, it really came to light when they actually brought us to the site, and we could see where all of the fees that would have normally been negotiated through a redevelopment subsidy from the city was now gone, and that fee was tacked onto each unit for your lateral development. That is your sewer and other streets and sidewalks, which a city would have normally taken care of with redevelopment. Redevelopment was gone and is gone, so now the city has to charge the developer. So Eden now has to pick up the price of that, which pushes that unit to $1 million.
It's $75,000 to $150,000 in the Tri-Valley. I just saw a BIA report that's the sort of range for the Livermore,
Goodness.
Pleasanton area. So you're spending $100,000 a unit for land, and then just to come out of the ground, you're spending another $75,000 to $150,000. So that's $250,000 right there, and you haven't built anything.
Yeah. Well, while we're with you, Linda, let's talk about subsidies for affordable housing.
We love them.
Okay. There you go. But are there other besides inclusionary requirements, are there other opportunities for subsidies that would be helpful in terms of low-income housing?
Well, I think subsidy from the federal government's been super important. We use the low-income housing tax credit. The state has a companion credit, which they extended once again in the state budget. And California we do a boom-bust thing with subsidy in California. Instead of just saying we're going to fund it every year in some kind of consistent number, we say, oh, when the budget's great, we're going to fund it, or we're going to eliminate it altogether when they wiped out redevelopment. We haven't really done steady investment. And so we have some really great programs in California, but as Carol said, because subsidy is so hard to come by, we are using as much of it as we can to drive to the lowest income, because it's really hard to get that stuff figured out. So at the federal level, we have Section 8, which is a voucher. So I as a tenant could rent from anybody, or I could get some assigned to Eden and then rent to those tenants. And that really matters because it helps the lowest income people. There's not a lot of subsidy in the middle, so I think that the property tax exemption is a potentially super important tool. And then we have nothing for home ownership, really, unless the city is doing it. Like, they're really, my admin is applying to buy one of these below-market Hayward houses, and I'm like, oh, please, God, let her win, because I'm afraid she's going to move.
Right,
So I think
right.
you need a continuum. And I would also just say this, there was one thing that happened during COVID that was a huge opportunity. Project Home Key, which is now Project Room Key, or it's the other way around, Room Key, then Home Key.
Yeah.
You know, we bought empty buildings. And we converted them into housing for people who were homeless. And whether that was a perfect success, maybe not, but it was a really smart idea. And it's one that we really need to think about. As we have an office building under contract in Marin that we are converting into permanently supportive housing. It's an empty office building, like no one's gonna occupy this thing. So all these shopping malls, like there's some real opportunity here for us to think about this.
Gotcha. Carol, are you hopeful?
Well, it depends what side of the bed I woke up on, and it also depends on what the news tells me. So,
Okay.
you know, Assemblymember Grayson's announcement today, that gives me hope. So I would just say it's, I'm not always hopeful,
Okay.
but I would say right now, I do feel like sometimes, you know, the darkest hour is before the dawn kind of thing. I think we are in such a dark place relative to homelessness that I think it has, and you know, COVID, all these things have just exposed. We were working on all these solutions, you know, 2017, 2018, 2019, and we've made huge progress in the state. And I don't think we should, and thanks to Michael Covarrubias and the Bay Area Council and CASA, we've made huge progress. There's still a lot more to do. I actually think, though, we've got much more political will than we've ever had.
I think that's true.
And, you know, we're not getting everything done that we want to get done, but, you know, I'm hopeful because it's so bad that people will finally, you know, roll up their sleeves and get not just creative, but get more radical. I mean, you know, we've picked off all the low-hanging fruit,
Right.
okay?
Right.
There's no low-hanging fruit left. You know, CEQA is not low-hanging fruit. We got to deal with it. The way the system of affordable housing finance is structured in California, where you have to put together 10 sources of money and wait 10 years, and you know, in between, the costs are going up at double digits every year. It's not acceptable. And it doesn't have to be that way. So there's a lot of self-inflicted wounds here, and we've got to get rid of those. And they're not easy.
That sounds hopeful to me. We're going to finish up with the Assemblyman, and we're closing in right on time. And you touched on it, Carol. So politically, and everyone sort of touched into this too. What can be done politically? What are some of the obstacles to getting the support for making some of these reforms that Carol sort of touched on? And Linda as well.
I'll start on a stress point and end on a really nice, relaxed point.
Go with it.
Well, I don't have a relaxed point. It's all stress. The stress point is, as was already alluded to, our state agencies. And what was really frustrating for me was for the third year in a row to run a bill in partnership with the state controller, and to really create good, smart, efficient government. 4 different agencies, state agencies, with 4 different applications, with 4 different timelines, and 4 different qualifications. And in some cases, those qualifications contradicted the other agency's qualifications, so that if you qualified with one, you discounted yourself from, or disqualified yourself from the other. Be able to take those 4 agencies, put them in, let them stay autonomous, stay independent, but bring them into one single committee with one single application, with one timeline and one set of qualifications, so that an affordable housing developer could come in with one application to one committee with one set of qualifications and one timeline, so that all the money could be dispersed at the same time, because you have to layer in California to afford to build. And because of deadlines of one, it wouldn't come in time to meet the other one, and therefore they would lose it. All that confusion would be gone. But instead of being able to have this bill get to the governor's desk this year, the best you could get was a hearing just so that we could test a testimony-only hearing. And so the controller and I are still working hard, and I will be back next year.
We hope you are.
I speak that optimistically, of course.
Linda, you want to add to that, and Carol as well? And I think we can wind it
You
up.
know, that's all politics. I'm going to just be Switzerland on that particular conversation. I couldn't agree with you more, but I can't undo the fact that we have multiple constitutional officers who are elected separately running housing. So that's California. It is not, I came from Massachusetts. It is not the same structure. The governor runs it all. And so, you know, I think that's really the problem. And you know, I don't know how to undo that personally because I just don't engage enough, I think, on the politics of this. But I do think, you know, I've always been a pragmatic optimist. And I feel like, and I do want to give a shout out to the Assembly, to the Pro Tem and the Senate. You know, I feel like California is paying attention in a big way, and it has been since 2016 in a way that I have not seen in the whole time that I've lived here. I moved here in '96. And I think it took us 30 years to dig ourselves into this hole, so we're not going to wave some magic wand and dig ourselves out in 5. But I have seen huge movement. I have a 5-0 council vote in Livermore in favor of us. They are talking about how much they want to do this, but I got some crazy lady who owns the local newspaper suing the hell out of this project. We have to stop that. That has to go away, but so many things are now lining up where every time Eden has been, because we work in high opportunity communities because we think that children who are low income should get access to those schools. Make no mistake, these are high opportunity areas. We really care about this. We need to make it possible for them to be there, and we need to do it faster. So we have to shut down citizen CEQA, as I lovingly call them. That needs to go away, but I feel like the momentum has shifted. We've had 3 lawsuits.
Yep.
We're winning them all. So I feel like it's there. What the legislature has done has laid really good groundwork. I just hope it's not too late.
Great. Well, thank you. We're at time. Join me in thanking all 3 of our great panelists on a great subject.